morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, I suppose, or good evening, possibly, depending on when you're watching or listening to this. And welcome to the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined today by Miss Sara. Sara, how are you?
Sorry, I'm just playing with my mute. I'm well. I'm trying to keep the hardy-dars out of the program.
Yeah, I know they have a habit of waiting for
Flying
you
over here.
and shouting.
Hardy-dars are helicopters.
But at least it keeps it gives people the knowledge that we truly are in South Africa, in the heart of of the country. And of course, we also have Mr. Gabriel Crouse, who is wearing a suit and tie, which is very fancy. So, Gabriel, welcome.
How's it? Thank you. And I just saw a hardy-dar this morning, and I hooted at it because it was in the road, and it didn't fly away. It just shrugged.
That's Joburg for you.
That's Joburg. Back in the
This
big
is
city.
our town now. Right. So let's talk about our first story. And our first story is that the Institute of Race Relations, which of course we all work for, has called for a rebate on property rights. On property rates. Tip of the tongue there. We put out a press statement about this, and we're going to be running a campaign about it. And Gabriel, you are leading the charge, I believe, in the media on this. So tell us a little bit about what the idea here is and what we can expect from the IRR.
So the idea is that our second and third parliaments in 2002 and 2004, in their might and wisdom, saw that although things were going well back then, we had GDP growth approaching 5%, we had jobs increasing faster than the population, we had service delivery rolling out to millions of people, piped water, houses, electricity. It was the good times. Despite all that, they predicted that the good times might not last forever and that there might be a state of disaster, and that in a state of disaster, municipalities might rebate, which is to say give back taxes, in particular property taxes, property rates that are extracted from property owners. Now, there's two elements of thinking behind this legislation. The first is that in a state of disaster, you might find that service delivery is no longer what it once was. And on the principle of pay for what you get, if you're no longer getting it, you should pay less or get some of your money back. The second side of it is that in a state of disaster, Parliament could foresee that there might be economic dislocations and that there might not be enough money and that jobs might be shrinking. And that a good way to deal with that would be to inject a little bit of cash back into the hands of ordinary citizens and businesses to avoid bankruptcy and jolt the economy back into life. And so we read the legislation and we think, if ever there was a case for implementing the legislation as envisaged in our lifetimes, it is now. And it is especially right now when we anticipate and watch this space, the government to announce yet a further extension of the state of disaster, an impeding third wave or perhaps third ripple in terms of lives lost, but certainly something like a third wave in terms of case numbers, and a vaccine program which will inoculate you against this virus just as soon as Jesus comes, or something like that. And on this basis, with the perspective all of 2021 being in a continued state of disaster, with the powers of government abrogated from Parliament and put into the hands of a self-elected executive to change the economy at their whim and beck, we think now is a really good time to put a little bit of cash back into the hands of ordinary citizens to boost household incomes, to boost businesses, especially those that have managed to survive this far but really are teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. And finally, a nice but interesting technicality, to alleviate the problem of bad debt, which is basically what happens when a municipality is owed property taxes by people who can't afford to pay them. And so the municipality spends a lot of money chasing that money down, doesn't actually get any of it because it's a bad debt. If you just rebate that debt, it cancels it out, and you don't have to bother with sending in the proverbial henchman to extract the money. So those are the three basic benefits. The basic principle is that legislation saw this coming, and we're not trying to bend the rules. We're just trying to stick to the rules. And so far, it seems like South Africans just haven't considered this possibility. So what we're doing is raising the possibility, taking it to South Africans. We're speaking on radio. We're placing things in the mainstream media. and we will be talking to politicians. Look, there's a municipal election coming up. Maybe some leaders are going to think this is a nice way to show citizens that we're serious, that we're not just trying to pull the money out for ourselves, that we really want it to go where it's most urgently needed, that we're sensitive to your needs, the citizen of South Africa.
I think so. I think it would be very good for people standing in local government to take up this call. Sara, your thoughts on this campaign? I must say that I mentioned that Gabriel was wearing a suit and tie, and he did say before the show that one should never talk about taxes without wearing a tie, and I think he's completely correct, because I don't know if it was just a good idea that he was pitching there or whether it was the tie, but it made a lot of sense to me. What's your thoughts, Sara?
To use Gabriel's metaphor, I think it'll happen when Jesus comes. And I think it'll happen when Jesus comes because most of our municipalities, including Joburg, are in such trouble that I think the very idea of, in any way, relaxing the requirement to pay rates or paying back anything, it's not going to happen. I think the problem is it's not a matter of sort of good or competent municipalities responding to an economic crisis brought on by the pandemic, but I think the things are so bad that that there is just not likely to be any positive response to this. I mean, already they've a few months ago voted on and now putting into place a 50 Rand monthly collection fee for what do you call them? Your rubbish, recyclables, because their contract and their experiment with it has now come to an end. And what the experiment showed was that the trolleypreneurs are very much better at the job than they are, and it would probably make sense to somehow create a program to work with the trolleypreneurs, but they're rather likely to spend an enormous amount of money on two companies who will continue to do the work despite being inefficient. So that's the background against which this call is being made. I think it may work with some municipalities, but I don't think it's going to be significant, unfortunately. So
I guess, Gabriel, the two questions to you are: do you think that the campaign can make a real impact, as in, responding to what Sara just said? And yeah, no, let's start with that one.
Okay, so just to give a sense of the scope here, we're not talking about all the money in the world. We're talking about 18.6 billion Rand, which was collected in property rates by municipalities in the financial year ending in 2020. So that's before the plague. Now, that number should be the same plus inflation, more or less, this year, so about 20 billion Rand. We're not saying that all of it should be rebated, but we're saying that some significant amount should be rebated, which would be a direct injection and would make a world of difference to those small businesses and property owners that get an extra few thousand Rand back. That's the first point. The second point is, yes, we have emailed Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who as Minister of Cooperative Governance has the sort of national prerogative to send out a missive to say to municipal councillors and members of council that if you want to go ahead with this, you actually have our blessing. Just do your due diligence first, but we think this is the right idea. After all, we were in Parliament when this thing was legislated in the first place, and we hope that the minister will respond appropriately. We're not convinced that that's going to happen, but what we do notice is that municipalities are an area of local government. They are an area, therefore, where one might expect the most diversity in response and the most reasoned responsiveness to the urgent calls of citizens. So if you are sitting in a council, whether it's in a big city or in a small rural area, and you join our campaign, go onto the website irr.org.za, you will find yourself able to just put in a name and an email, a municipality, and an email will be sent. You can check the language yourself, which very humbly and forcefully says what I've said about why this is a good idea, and that will go to your councillor. And if your councillor is getting a few dozen or a few hundred, or in the next couple of weeks, a few thousand of those letters, the political calculus of thinking about a seat under contest coming up at the end of the year will open ears. And we do believe that this is the kind of idea which, yes, in some places is never going to work out because some people just don't listen. But in a lot of places, there is a real chance that it could work out. And so we urge citizens to give it a go for your community. We're not going to change the whole national perspective overnight. But if you work from the grassroots up, you can build one brick at a time, to mix my metaphors, one on top of the other. And we think we really can get there, and we think we can make a serious difference to some number of households and businesses who desperately need that difference to be made.
Right. So here's the second point I wanted to ask you about, Gabriel. I suspect the main line of attack that will come on this campaign is, well, look, municipalities actually need this money. COVID has hit them as hard because generally the tax base has been kind of shrunk and the economic conditions have gotten worse. So the municipalities, a lot of them are in bad financial state. As we know, we've talked about it before, about how some municipalities don't pay their bills or can't pay their bills. Some are in financial rescue, some are in financial ruin. So the claim here is that this rebate is just for, the wealthy property owning class, whereas government provides services to the poor who don't own property. And so what you're really doing is you're taking things away from the poor. What's your response to that?
So if you look at Treasury data, municipalities failed to spend 80% of their budget in the year ending before COVID. So there were quite a few million sitting in the tikkie that they just didn't do anything with. They didn't spend that on the poor. They spent it on nothing at all. They couldn't even find the tenderpreneur to get the fake contract to get the sludge through the system. So that's before COVID. After COVID, it's gone to 40 to 50% of budgets underspent. And some of that money can't be rebated because some of the money that the municipalities take in comes from national taxation, and then that gets redistributed to the municipality on the basis of a special grant allocated for a particular purpose. Now, a lot of that money is not being spent because the idea of building a bridge or a dam with a crew that's not allowed to sort of get in the same taxi, that didn't work out. But the bulk of their expenses are, surprise, surprise, operating costs, in other words, salaries. And because some of those salaries are actually tied to clocking in, about 40% of that's gone underspent. So there's at least 20 billion at the very least on Treasury's latest estimate in the kinds of costs, kinds of operating costs that have gone underspent that could then be rebated. The alternative is to leave it in government's coffers, to roll it over, to absorb it back into the national fiscus, from whence it can go to anyone's favorite project, like SAA bailouts, or I don't know, Janelle, pick your flavor. Right now, it's sitting in the municipality's hands. That means it's the most distributed. It's the most close to the point of contact with the ordinary citizen. And as I said already, because of the political nature of things, this is the place where citizens can, at their local level, apply the most direct pressure to get it released, to get those funds released back into their hands, rather than being reabsorbed back to the union buildings in Pretoria, and from there reallocated into the ether.
Right. I also like the point you brought up earlier about bad debt, because, of course, a problem that's plagued quite a few municipalities, but specifically Joburg, I think, has been the place where it's been worse, is incorrect municipal billing. And so I wonder how much of that bad debt is not so much bad debt because the person responsible is ducking and diving and, is difficult to catch and make pay up. I wonder how much of that bad debt is because the municipality actually is in the wrong. And in which case, a rebate would be very welcome to those people who have been fighting with the municipality for ages on this issue to see some relief. It would be a very citizen positive thing to do, and would cut against our criticisms of citizen abuse, which is one of our last campaigns we ran.
Yeah, and this only works if. But look, this is all. I think this is all very clever. I didn't come up with this idea, but I heard it and I thought, wow, this all makes sense. All the ducks are in a row, notwithstanding the very real complaints about the background conditions that our municipalities are in. And okay, so I lend my voice to it, but this is my job. I think people need to think about their communities and realize that this could work, but it'll only work if people make it just a little hobby. A 5-minute hobby horse. Jump on it, ride it, send off that message, and let's see where it goes.
definitely. Active citizenship, always a good thing. Really does help. And some cases you're going to find your local politician might be on your side, in which case being an active citizen can help them do their job better. Anyway, so let's sorry, one more thing. Gabriel, what's the website again? Please give us the details of that.
IRR.org.campaign, or if you just look up IRR campaign property rates, just Google that or DuckDuckGo it, or whatever search engine you prefer. It'll be the first thing that comes up. But yeah, IRR.org.za on campaigns. It's also just the first thing on the homepage. Give it a click. Have a look at the language that we use, and lend your voice to this mission.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned DuckDuckGo, because it's a great website. I wish they would sponsor us, but they haven't. Okay, so let's get on to our next story today, and that is, of course, I think this is the first time we've talked very specifically about COVID in a while, but the infamous Indian COVID variant has made its landfall in South Africa. This is I think the name for the variant is the B16172, which doesn't roll off the tongue so well. Anyway, so yes, there are some fears that this might contribute to that third wave or third ripple, as Gabriel described it earlier. Well, let me start off with a little bit of the political side of this before we perhaps get into some stuff about the variant in particular. And that is, I remember Health Minister Willem Kizi giving a press conference, I think last week, saying, guys, just relax. There's no need to be concerned about this. Government's on top of this. We're watching and monitoring for the variant, and we're going to take it very seriously. And then literally a week later, it pops up in the country. Now, maybe it's been contained, or maybe it won't spread or whatever, but I must say that considering government's track record over the past couple of months in some of these things, I'm not so sure. I believe that there's been no proper travel restrictions placed on India, even since the variant began circulating there. Apparently, we're still in consultation about that. Sara, what are your thoughts on this?
I don't know whether to laugh or cry about this, because I would have thought that the one thing you do, even if whether it can have that, whether it's a good idea or not, is you ban travel from India. Just ban travel, even if you lift it a week or so later. Ban travel. India is not coping with what it's got, and literally, I mean, I don't know if I'm not getting something. You stop people from coming in, landing in South Africa with the virus and the particular variant. We're going into winter, so there's likely to be an uptick. How big or small it will be, I think, is open to question at the moment. But surely the simplest thing, if not perhaps the most politically sort of desirable, I don't know what sort of relations they have over the flights to or from India and who gains what from what else, but that's the sort of thing you do. It's certainly been the response in most places in Europe and places like that. You stop people coming in and then you figure it out. You don't think about figuring it out, wait a while, and then say, well, maybe. And they're talking about closing the route from India. Well, it's sort of, stable door being bolted after the horse or something. I'm mixing my metaphors.
Right. I believe the National Institute for Communicable Diseases said, quote, rather than panic, I think we should focus on making sure our resurgent plans are in place and we are engaging with communities about non-pharmaceutical interventions and and hospitals are ready in terms of oxygen beds, ICUs, etc. Gabriel, you've read a little bit about this variant. What are your thoughts, firstly, on that political question I asked Sara, and also what do we know so far about this Indian variant? How big of a problem is it going to be for South Africa?
Yeah, so on the political question, I think there's a clear case of double standards. I remember last year, because I was intimately connected with the case, that Germany had some of the lowest daily cases in the world at the time, was very on top of their business, but they remained banned. The travel ban continued against Germans coming to South Africa, an inordinately and ridiculously long period. Indian government is totally not on top of the situation. It's pretty sad what's happening there, and there's the variant, but this time it's a thing to debate. So I think terrible double standard. In terms of the Indian strain's actual threat, I do think that it's easy to overestimate. The paper identifying its cardinal features notes one of the main mutations is a 484Q. Now, people who followed COVID closely will remember that South Africa's variant major cardinal mutation was 484K. Now, that means the 484, the 484th little spot on the virus can be three things, and it went from its original to being a K, and that was bad because it made it more infectious. Also made it better at dodging our immune system. And a virologist at the start of the year said to me, look, I expect a Q mutation to become dominant at some point, but only in concert with a few others, because the Q alone is not going to work so nicely. You need some other things to make up for the sort of deficit that it creates. And that's a prediction which has completely been vindicated, which should give one a nice sense that this is not all shooting in the dark. Now, what I think the headline finding of public interest in the paper that I'm referring to, identifying the Indian strain, is that it's about twice as good at evading your immune system if you've already had the original strain or something like the South African strain as just the original South African strain would be. So that means if you get infected, if you've been infected or you've been vaccinated, which is like being infected, then let's say you've got a 70% chance of being completely immune, but you've got a 99.9% chance of not getting really sick, or 98% chance of not getting really sick, and a 99.9999% chance of not dying. So if you double the chance of dying, it goes from 0.0001% to 0.0002%. 1 in 10 million to 2 in 10 million. So that's basically what's going on with the Indian strain on the best available evidence, and it's pretty strong. It's not decisive. Scientists will keep scratching, but it's pretty strong. So if you've been vaccinated, yeah, it's not great, but you probably won't get very sick or die. And if you've already recovered and you get infected with the Indian strain, you probably won't get sick or die. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the virus is keeping pace again with the best data on coronavirus mutations over the last 30, 40 years. A lot of this came from the UK established a brilliant laboratory to study coronaviruses in the 60s, and an 8-month sort of gestation mutation period to get new escape mutations, which means it's somewhat better at beating the immune system, seems to be the regular time period for them. Over 5 years, the problem is, if you keep accumulating those little doublings, you get to the point where even if you've been vaccinated or you've been infected and recovered, you're basically a virgin, or what virologists call virally naive. And that means you're as delicate a flower as we all were when coronavirus first came along. And that's not a very good situation to be in, because a lot of people did die and we had a lot of lockdowns. So the long and short of it is, I don't think the Indian mutation in itself is particularly frightening, but it does again speak to a claim that I made at the start of this year, that the best bet is that coronavirus is going to live longer than all of us. It's going to keep mutating. And if we're not very careful, that could, in the midterm, result in another very hairy situation.
Right. And I believe it's correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gabriel, but that the less transmission there is, the less opportunity there is for mutations to occur, which means
Correct.
that basically if you damp down the numbers a lot, you can get to a point where the problem is unlikely to return the same way, right? Because if mutations are, take 3 times as long, then it's going to be much harder for them to get ahead of us. Is that right?
Yeah. So you can corner the virus or drive it into a cul-de-sac where there's just a tiny portion of the population that's susceptible to it in a naive way, COVID virgins, and where most people have some level of immunity, and so it's very hard for it to spread through them, and it basically goes extinct. That was always the plan from the beginning, and it is doable. It's just not doable in the way that we're doing it.
Yeah, well, it's not doable when our whole program to deal with COVID has been such a mess. But that's...
If we were all Israel, I think we could really drive COVID extinct. If the whole world was South Africa, there'd be no point even trying.
Yeah, we should just
Exactly.
exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so obviously this is going to keep coming up for a while, but hopefully we do get a handle on it. I mean, governments made big claims about their vaccination program in the next couple of.
I think we better hope that our herd immunity is greater than our capacity for vaccinating people.
Yeah.
If I can say one last thing about that, I'm not entirely right in saying if we were all if all governments were like South Africa's, there'd be no point in trying. There are two reasons to get vaccinated or to get, two benefits to having recovered from the infection. One is the social thing, that you're less likely to pass it on. But the other one is that you yourself are less likely to get very sick or die. And that's a very valuable thing. That's a good reason to put in effort. So I think, I've been seeing about this vaccine tourism to Zimbabwe. I'm very much trying to plan to go to Zimbabwe with my family because, it won't save South Africa, but it can do something for a little group of people that mean a lot to me.
Right. No, that's pretty fun idea, and I think that'll be a great story if you get the chance to write it. Cool. So we don't have a lot of time left, but I just want to mention briefly our last story for today, and we'll get a sort of 30-second take from each of you on it, which is that a very big gas line in the United States, a gas pipeline, has had to shut down due to a ransomware attack. So what's that? That's where hackers manage to enter your system, maybe through a phishing email, maybe through a virus, something like that, and they encrypt all the data on your system and basically lock you out of it and say, you need to pay us a certain amount of money in cryptocurrency, or else we're going to release your data to the public and also keep it encrypted on your own system. So it'll just be a bit of a nightmare. This is not the first time this has happened to a big organization. I remember the National Health Service in the UK had a big ransomware attack recently, which they had to pay the ransom for. These guys, I don't think, have been caught, or at least may have been identified very recently. And in this case, I believe the company has probably paid millions of dollars in cryptocurrency. And what's difficult about these things is it's difficult to know who's behind them. And so this threatens to disrupt supply of oil to the eastern coast of the United States. And I think they're still working on fixing it. But I don't know who wants to go first here. I guess I'll start with you, Sara, in about sort of 30 seconds or so. What are your thoughts on this? Is this a problem that's going to keep growing bigger?
I think it is, because the US has shown itself quite vulnerable to a range of cyber attacks recently in different areas. And here you're dealing with the largest pipeline in America. It goes from Texas to North Carolina, and another line goes to New York. And the only thing that's going to mitigate the possible effects of the disruption of supply is actually the fact that COVID itself and the lockdowns reduced the demand, and they're in summer. So all round, there's not likely to be a great shortage before it comes back online. But they are, on the other hand, reaching a point that with the lockdowns being reduced and it being summer, and the summer holidays are coming up in America, the demand will increase. So it's essentially I think it's the company is called Colonial, and they're going to need to resolve it sooner rather than later, because they have a little bit of time in their favor, but they can't last for very long.
Gabriel, what are your thoughts on ransomware attacks?
Yeah, I think that we are in an arms race. I don't think that America is the least secure place. I think it has holes in its system that you don't find analogs of in Russia and China, for example, but they have holes that the Americans don't have. I think that the salient difference is the ambition and energy of those who fly under the skull and crossbones in the 21st century's equivalent of the wild seas, that they really see America as being the greatest target because they've got the most money. So Americans playing a bit of catch up right now. They're going to have to keep doing that. Does make one think, in your own business, like, I hope you have some level of, I'm glad that we have pretty high tech OTP and all kinds of things protecting us. I do always wish that it was a little bit tighter, because I get worried about, I think of this and I think, well, what happens to us if we get struck like that?
Well, the ANC had it on the weekend with the leaked documents.
Yeah, I suspect in a few years from now we'll be very used to talking about ransomware attacks.
Well, they can try and ransom us. We haven't got the money.
Right.
Yeah.
I suspect the golden age of internet. I'm not going to call it piracy because that sort of means something else on the internet. But swashbuckling and buccaneering is perhaps at hand. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for listening. We will be back tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Friend Show. Please, if you'd like to support the Institute of Race Relations and our campaigns, go to our website, irr.org.za. Click the Join Us button, click the Campaigns button, see what we're up to. Gabriel just talked about what we're specifically up to at the moment, but that's always current. Anyway, thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow.